Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Tuesday. It is March the 25th, and we are going to be trying to answer the question, a simple and important question, oops or op. There was a recently leaked, maybe, signal message chat that came from high levels of Trump's administration talking about bombing the Houthis in Yemen. And the question is this intentional? Was this accidental? Is this the first real scandal? Is it a big screw up on behalf of the Trump administration? Does it look like a scandal, but maybe it wasn't supposed to be? Are we dealing with the 4D chess crowd? I think the full answer, I'm going to give you guys the bottom line up front. It actually depends on what happens next for us to be able to determine what was meant to be done. There's a couple of possibilities. It could have been a screw up that they used for strategic advantage. It could have been planted and intentional, and we'll find out about that based on how they handle it. A lot of that's going to have to do with personnel decisions after the fact. But we're going to go through all of that. We're going to talk about classified enclaves. We're going to talk about Democrat talking points. We're going to talk about the Atlantic and narrative construction. Got a couple other things on there. 23andMe is out there, bankrupted and getting rid of your data. What else? Trump administration going to court and trying to figure out what is the solution to activist judges. So we've got a long ways to cover. We've got a lot of stuff to do. I've got a full video deck of interesting clips and why maybe it doesn't even matter that much. And maybe I will float out the most 4D chess possibility. Is it possible that all of this stuff is a setup to get Democrats caught in a bear trap about what Hillary Clinton did in 2015, 2016? Is that possible? It's possible. I don't know if I'm convinced yet. Again, I'm going to be reserving a little bit of judgment on that. Folks, if you are following us on Rumble, we appreciate it. You can always watch the show live here for the best live chat. It's rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. On X and on YouTube, it's at Kyle Seraphin. And if you want to find us on Locals for all of the articles after the fact, it's KyleSeraphin.com. You can get them for free. Just click on the logo up in the top left-hand side. And then lastly, if you're watching this and you're sick of pop-up ads and you're watching anywhere else and you want to give us the same view, you can watch either the audio or listen to the video, and you can switch between them on Spotify at KyleSeraphinShow.com. Very, very simple stuff. Okay, I've teased out what we're going to get into. I'll ask the chat in just a second. But before we get started and deep into this, let's go ahead and talk about our friends who I think they get it. This is my phone. I've got signal chats on here. I don't want them interrupting the program. So we're going to put this into my Faraday sleeve, which I usually do off camera, but we do it on camera when we talk about my friends over at Silent. Folks, you can get your own Faraday sleeve by going to silent.com/KYLE. Whether it's government, big tech, whether it's corporate journalists, corporate America, criminals, etc. If they are trying, they will try to compromise your privacy. They can do so 24/7 anytime you have your device on. There's no other option than protect yourself. That can start with Silent. It's SLNT. That's silent without the vowels. Their Faraday products will block all incoming and outgoing signals. Your devices become virtually invisible, and they are safe from the outside world. They really work. You can buy cheaper ones. They just don't work. Ask me how I know. I used to do this for a living. You can buy their backpacks. You can check out their phone sleeves, their tablet sleeves. They even make a pair of pants that have patented signal blocking technology. This is a little bit of, they have three different pillars. One of them is just if you want a little peace and quiet. If you want to put your phone in a bag while you are having dinner with your family, I highly encourage you doing that. You can also get some peace and quiet when you're doing your podcast here. It doesn't just give you peace of mind. It also makes sure that your data is not going to end up in the wrong hands, that someone's not going to hack it when you are out in public. You can safeguard it when you're on planes and traveling and so on. I do all these things. Go silent at slnt.com/KYLE. Save yourself 15%. They make an American-made product. If you guys are so inclined, you're going to pay a little bit more for that. You can get the overseas-made product, which is just as good when it comes to the capabilities. They make these things for the military. There's all kinds of different agencies that are using them. You can save 15% on all your qualified orders, and you'll get free shipping at slnt.com/KYLE. The link is in the show description. It is in the show notes. Check them out, and let's dive into this. We're going to be talking about signals. We're going to be talking about whether or not you need to be protecting yourself or what these people needed to be do. Maybe the Trump administration is playing everybody, and they just kept their stuff out of the Faraday bag. Let's find out. All right, I will get there, and we'll probably spend 50% of the show talking about it because I've got a handful of interesting clips and stuff that I want to get into. First, let's talk about activist judges because they seem to be a real problem, and maybe there is an issue that can be solved that doesn't involve impeachment. That's what's been floated as a possible solution. How do we just get rid of all these a-holes? They're out there doing wild stuff, and one of the solutions is that Congress, the Article 1 powers, as described by our Constitution, actually step into the role that Congress is supposed to do. Just a quick refresher for all of you who are listening. Article 1, the first thing discussed by our founding fathers was the legislator. They thought that the people who represented the people were the ones who should have most of the power and that it should be only given out by consensus. Okay? The second most powerful position is Article 2 powers. These come under the executive. They did not imagine such a powerful executive as we have today. And then Article 3, last but not least, but probably least, if we're being honest about it, is a Supreme Court, one court, not necessarily even called the Supreme Court, that would have various inferior courts that were established from time to time. Kyle, why do you always say the words established from time to time and use the words inferior? Because it tells you that it's a transient in nature, that this fixed federal court system that has district courts and circuit courts and then finally access to a Supreme Court, those things are not described by the Constitution. Those things were laid out by Congress, which means that Congress has the ability to amend the scope and the parameters under which these district courts and these circuit courts can actually operate. They are inferior. So they are not able to just do things as they please. They cannot operate with impunity. And there is zero instance when you read the Constitution that makes you think that a judge from a lower, inferior, established in a transient nature court should ever be blocking the executive powers that are established under Article 2, at least not to my reading of it. I do understand that there's now 250 years worth of case law that has come up, but we do have to remember that they created the power called judicial review. They created it. The judiciary said, look, they elbowed their way up to the table. We're going to be playing a clip later from Timcast. And if you've ever seen the show that Tim Pool does over at Timcast, I've been there. I've recommended my buddies for the show, and they've had a couple of them on. And I always give the same advice. Going on Timcast is like a competitive dinner party. If you want to say something, you're going to have to sort of edge your way in. You're going to have to make sure that you are heard. And I think the judiciary did that very early on. Madison versus Marbury. If you guys remember anything from your middle school civics classes, from your American federal government type classes, yeah, that's where you find it. They created this. So this is an interesting story that comes from NBC, and I don't think it's wrong. It actually would be good to see Congress do the job of Congress and not shirk the responsibility of actually doing most of the lawmaking and the rule creating in this country as they were designed to do. The article is entitled, As Trump and His Allies Push to Impeach Judges, which is obviously something going on right now. And I don't know that it's the solution. I don't know that it's not the solution, though. Some of these people clearly need to be removed. I've seen so many weird conflicts of interest. Just saying, some of these folks are not operating under what they call good behavior, which is the grounds for getting rid of them. The article continues, Speaker Mike Johnson is eyeing an escape hatch. And that escape hatch is a bill that is introduced by Darrell Issa, Republican California, that would give maybe an off-ramp to let's go straight to hearings and try to get rid of federal judges. Although I don't think that's a terrible idea. I think anybody who thinks that their job is safe forever, no matter what they do, especially when they are operating as an activist and they are operating as the Trump resistance in robes, as is described later on in this article, I don't think that's a good thing to have, not for the nation. But Issa is saying, essentially, what if we could voice support for what Donald Trump is doing, and we can limit these judges specifically by this bill that is referred to as the No Rogue Rulings Act. And the goal of this piece of legislation would be to bar district court judges from issuing nationwide injunctions. You know, the thing that we've been talking about here, the thing that all people sort of gently realize is necessary. Because historically, judges acted with a thing called restraint. We see this with John Roberts all the time. His instinct is less to do what is exactly constitutionally appropriate. His instinct is always, how do I protect the institution of the court? It's why most people don't consider him conservative. We find that to be an awfully squishy position. There is a right and a wrong. A judge is supposed to be able to deal with that. And more importantly, the judge is actually supposed to weather all of the good and the bad that comes their way if they did their damn job properly. Which is to say, they don't care whether anybody likes it. They don't put their finger up in the wind and see which way it is blowing. And they certainly don't take a public opinion poll. But because these are regular people, because they are susceptible to all the things that happen, because of the things that many of us have experienced since COVID, since all of the government overreach that started happening in 2020, that did happen under Donald Trump's administration, whether or not he was in charge of it or not, a lot of us got this understanding that there are much fewer people of principle than we originally thought. Wouldn't you think? That's kind of where I've landed. There are far fewer people that have principles that I would consider to be normal. We found this out. We have an entire class of people, an entire category where people say, listen, they will give their life for you in our military, right? We think the same thing about our law enforcement officers, of whom by default, I stand with them. I stand with law enforcement because I know what it takes to go do that job. But you don't get a pass if you cross that line. And you certainly don't get a pass when you are saying that you will give your life for your community and you won't even give up your job or your paycheck or your convenience or your comfort for the right thing. And we found out about that. That's what my group is about. That's what my friends all figured out at the same time. That most of the people that worked alongside us in the FBI didn't have that instinct. That doesn't mean everybody was put to a decision for their chips. But of the people that I saw who were put to a decision for it, most of them opted out. They said, that's actually inconvenient. I did say that I would swear my life and allegiance, that I would put my honor on the line, and I would back up the Constitution. But in reality, that's actually really difficult because I've got a mortgage and I've got alimony and I'm almost close to retirement and I don't want to do any of that stuff. And yes, those are direct words that were given to me by people I worked with inside our quote unquote most premier law enforcement agency. This is the badge right here, folks. This is what it's about. Like, this one's a joke. I'm wearing a t-shirt right now from my buddy Garrett O'Boyle. It's the-suspendables.com if you guys want to get your own. This is actually one of my favorite shirts because I came up with it. I watched Zelensky. We watched Vladimir Zelensky walk around while he was wearing that sort of like combat sweater over and over again. You can get this in OD green, which is the original color. And he was wearing that combat sweater and he was begging for billions of dollars from the American Congress when they were rolling over and writing blank checks over to Ukraine. You call that. And I thought, man, our people just want folks to do the right thing. Maybe we could go to Congress and wear these shirts, the Zelensky special. They're called the Z special, I think, if you find them online. And it's a favorite of mine simply because it says, how about some principles and how about a little bit of like that tongue-in-cheek irony that we like to do? The No Rogue Rulings Act is a brilliant idea. In so much as it is a short-term, it is a smaller solution than just saying, hey, we're going to go nuclear and we're going to remove, destroy, eliminate federal judges from the work they're doing. It's appropriately pointed out. He says, quote, this is Darrell Issa, the sponsor of the bill. Quote, we have a major malfunction in our judiciary. And practically every week, another judge casts aside the tradition of restraint. Again, restraint means you still have the authority. You could act maybe more aggressively, but you know that you shouldn't because it will discredit you. They've thrown that out the window. The tradition of restraint from the bench, and they opt to be the Trump resistance in robes. He said this is a constitutional solution to a national problem. This should be something that people on the left and the right agree with. They don't want to see nationwide injunctions popping in. The only reason that this should happen is that it should happen at a much higher level. It should be regional. It should start with district and maybe even the circuit. But you should never have a nationwide injunction from someone who represents a very, very small portion. You have people, and look, we were beneficiaries of this during the COVID chaos, me and the guys. We put in a lawsuit in the Southern District of Texas, and it blocked all enforcement of the federal government's ability to do the vaccine mandate. And you think, well, that's pretty good. That benefits us. Yes, but what did it do? It was the government constraining government action. And in reality, it needed to get escalated right away and was reviewed by the en banc part of the Fifth Circuit, which is where it actually had its final day in court. And then they refused to let it go to the Supreme Court because they knew that we would win. And they actually withdrew. At the end of the day, very few people are willing to say, if it cuts against me, then I'm willing to lose this power. It's my big issue right now with the FBI and why people are excited. You don't want to see a loss of power when you're the one in charge. The only time that you can actually curtail power is when you are in charge. This takes a long view. It has to be a long view because we don't want to get in a world where we are back and forth destroying judges. We don't want to get in a world where we have anybody who has the power is able to wield it sort of dangerously. And we're basically fighting a war for the ring of power. Who has control of the executive? Who has control of the most judges? And then whoever has that gets to be able to make the rules for a period of time and squash the other side. It is very, very short-sighted. That is not an America I want to live in. And it's not an America you should want for your children. We shouldn't be hitting back and forth power and the ability to manipulate the judiciary or the executive in some sort of like ping pong ball fashion. We shouldn't. I'm going to do some narrative manipulation too, because I think all of this discussion of op, and we're going to get into it right now, I guess, the question of whether or not we are dealing with an op, I started looking at the broader context of the discussion where this Signal chat popped out. And so if you are sleeping under a rock or if you haven't been paying attention to the news cycle, maybe you get it just from here. If that's the case, make sure you curate a news cycle, get something like The Loop, get something from my friends at Catholic Vote, get something that gives you kind of a broad sweep of all the things that are going on. But broadly speaking, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, and a couple of others were involved in a Signal chat, supposedly. Okay, that's what we're led to believe. And they accidentally, I'm going to put the word accidentally right now in air quotes because I don't know the answer. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Added a so-called journalist, a propagandist from The Atlantic. More on that in a second. And they started discussing some of their rationale for whether or not they were going to move forward on bombing the Houthis in Yemen, who have been disrupting shipping channels that sort of affect the United States. J.D. Vance was supposedly involved in there as well. So you had cabinet level officials. You had folks from the White House having this discussion. Stephen Miller apparently was implicated in this as well as being part of it. And so the question was, did this happen? Was it intentional? Was it an accident? Was this a serious breach? I've got a couple of different pundits that are going to weigh in on it, but this also looked like it was part of the story because we have to consider it in a broader context. Top intelligence leaders are going to testify about global threats amid questions over Yemen strike report. This is coming from CBS. Leaders in the United States intelligence community, that's going to include the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who was also supposedly part of this group, FBI Director Kash Patel, NSA Director Tim Haug. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, sorry. And then the DIA director as well. The question was, these people are about to go in front of the Hill. And they're supposed to be talking about Russia. They're supposed to be talking about Iran. They're supposed to be talking about China. They're supposed to be talking about emerging and the most predominant threats. And that might get completely derailed because of this story, which happened just before they're going to go and testify. Less than 24 hours before they are set to appear on the Hill, you've got a big story about Yemen and the Houthis, and they could talk about that all day long, and they could completely ignore the major security threats. Is that a possibility? We have to consider it. We have to consider that they may have been misleading people and doing the shiny, red dot on the ground, having a cat chase the laser pointer, and the media duly obliged. In the meantime, we also heard Jim Jordan say, and I wanted not before we disappear, because whenever I get a chance to play a Jim Jordan talking point without any sort of action, I don't want to leave the judges thing too quickly. This is also implicated in the story of op versus oops, because one of the things that is brought up in the op versus oops is the question of state secrets. Were they revealed? And that continues to be something discussed in the judiciary. Does the executive have the ability to ignore judges when it comes to certain national security priorities? Again, those people are going to be testifying. We're going to be talking about whether or not those were exposed, discussing a Yemen strike. And then we've got the ability of the Trump administration, people like Stephen Miller, who are pushing out there and said, hey, no, we're using the Alien Enemies Act. We're going to be telling you that it is a state secrets issue, and we are not going to be moving forward and allowing you to have any access. This is the actual story here. This is also from CBS. The Trump administration invoked the state secrets privilege in the deportation case. This is where the entire judge things happen. So you can get really narrow on the problem, which is that there's one judge, Judge Boasberg, who has some questionable compromises, or you can get broader and say, how do we fix this problem more generally speaking? I think that Darrell Iss's solution is the more eloquent of them, which just says, look, District judges don't need to be making nationwide injunctions. We're going to put that into law. Then you have no question. Interpret the law as it's written. You don't have the ability to impose nationwide injunctions, period. If you need to elevate, then do so more quickly. And if the courts see that there's a problem, they should step up and step into the circuit and the Supreme Court more quickly. All right? Here's the narrow-minded solution: impeachment and hearings, which tend to go nowhere. This stuff is performative. I'd actually like to see Congress do their job. Enough with the hearings, enough with the Jim Jordan talking in the strongly worded letters, which, by the way, that was the universal response from folks when I posted this video yesterday. Everybody thinks, well, yeah, we're going to get stupid letters and we're going to have hearings that go nowhere. Just remember, when they hold hearings, people in Congress seem to believe that that actually is the action. That's the action that they're looking for. Here he is saying it on Fox.
Frankly, there's the broader issue of all these judges' injunctions and then decisions like Judge Boasberg, what he's trying to do and how that case is working. We're going to have hearings on all of that, because particularly when you look at Judge Boasberg, it starts to look like this is getting totally political from this guy, particularly when you remember he's also the judge who was part of the whole Trump-Russia FISA court, granting those warrants that allowed the Comey FBI to spy on President Trump's campaign. So we're going to look at that issue as well. But hopefully we can get that bill passed next week on the House floor, move it to the Senate, hopefully get it to the president's desk.
What do you think you're going to find here? It seems to me like it's pretty black and white. You know, you find the judge that's going to rule in your favor, and it's been going on for 20 plus years.
Yeah, that's why we want to limit it to just that jurisdiction, just the parties of the case, so it doesn't have nationwide implications. But yeah, this is the way the left operates. They go to these judges and they go after President Trump, as the speaker indicated, disproportionately more there than elsewhere. But with Judge Boasberg, think about this. I mean, I think the president, with his order on these gang members, sending him back or sending him to El Salvador, I think constitutionally he's on solid ground. Article 2, Section 1, first sentence, executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. Statutorily, the Alien Enemies Act, predatory incursion, that's certainly what this was. Gang members coming here illegally doing terrible things. And then finally, you got this judge saying this crazy decision: turn the plane around, bring the bad guys back to America. That makes no sense. So when you look at all that, coupled with this judge's history with the FISA court, with the sentence he gave to Kleinsmith, the lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith, who altered the document in front of the FISA court, it really starts to look like Judge Boasberg is operating purely political against the president. And that's what we want to have hearings on, this broad issue and some of what Judge Boasberg is doing. And so we're going to start those next week, and we think Senator Grassley is going to do the same.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward, right? You should limit this thing. Instead of doing what they call judge shopping or jurisdictional shopping, where they run out there and they try to find who's the right person that's going to be able to hear this case and give us the favorable opinion that's going to affect the entire country, you can get it narrowly. They always go to D.C., by the way. You'll notice all the judges that were on the panel there that were being shown on Fox News, every one of them are D.C. judges. And all those judges also heard things like January 6th cases, and they ruled very aggressively against people for their First Amendment right, which you should have a First Amendment ability, and they should have looked at it and said, hey, is there anything fair about these prosecutions? I don't like what happened on January 6th. But the fact that they've gone there and made that a single party issue where Democrats are like still running on it. I'm actually going to show you that they will sit there and say Donald Trump is incredibly talented because he was able to turn January 6th, acting like these things do not happen in a context, acting like they don't go shopping for a jurisdiction to be able to file this kind of stuff. D.C. is one of the softest circuits where you can go and get a pro-government ruling because almost everybody in D.C. works for government, is obsessed with the understanding of government jobs and how valuable they are to their life. They almost all have someone in their friend group. They almost all have someone in their family that is working for the government. They may themselves be working for government. Obviously, if you're a judge, you are. So we've got to get this thing sort of squared away. I like to see something solved with a law that is passed. That means that people are going to have to agree that we don't want to do the ping pong ball of influence whenever somebody else wins. I don't want to see it. It's not good for America. We're going to get deeper into that stuff. We'll talk about the state secret argument in a second here, too, because I think that's relevant. And then we're going to get into this chat. And we'll do the op or oops, which I do think is a fascinating discussion. And again, we don't actually have enough information to make that decision. We have some leanings. So what we can do is we can set up, if the following things happen soon, then we can kind of decide a little bit closer to whether it was op or. We never actually may understand this. They may not actually, I don't think they'll come out and say it. They shouldn't. if they're smart, because then they can use this technique again. All right. Speaking of techniques, speaking of people trying to unsettle us and make things kind of chaotic and crazy, there's always the possibility that even though things are generally speaking going the way that we hope, and they are, I think most people are feeling slightly better about America. Democrat polling is very low, right? So now is a good time when you're feeling like things are a little bit safe to go ahead and get yourself prepped up for disaster. It's preparelikekyle.com. We've seen it before. If disaster strikes, you're going to end up with empty grocery shelves overnight. The best time to prepare is before a disaster. You don't want to do it when it's too late. Then it is too late. Smart Americans trust My Patriot Supply to help them before any crisis comes, and right now they're making it easier than ever. You can order the 4-week emergency food kit today, and you're also going to get 4 bonus 72-hour food kits completely free. It's almost 2 weeks of food, but more importantly, it's 4 individual kits that you can stash in places where you might need them. 72 hours is kind of the E&E phase, the evasion, right, phase that you might be able to stash something. So you can put it in your go bag, you can put it in your vehicle. It's going to have 2,000 calories per day. They're easy to prepare. They last for up to 25 years. Just don't store them in direct sunlight. Put them in the right places. Keep them semi-climate controlled. That's real peace of mind. There's no last minute panic. There's no emptying of store shelves. There's just knowing that you have an insurance policy and it's made of food and calories so you can make good decisions. You can stock up today before the deal disappears, because when disaster or emergencies hit, food is almost always the first thing to go. That and toilet paper, we found out, right? Preparelikekyle.com. Claim your own kit, plus those additional 12 days of free food, those 4 72-hour food packs. Prepare like Kyle, preparelikekyle.com. Check that out in the show description. Let's keep pressing onward with some of these stories here. Another thing, this is the other question, op, or oops. There's another kind of an example of this. This is coming from, I believe, ABC, talking about Trump and tariffs. They're going to start on April 2nd, and they are now reporting that they will be much narrower than previously threatened. Donald Trump loves to say something really, bold and brash, and then he likes to kind of walk some things back, doesn't he? Isn't that interesting? Tariffs. April 2nd, they're going to be less. The fresh rounds of duties will be marked by a significant escalation from the United States from its previous position with trading partners. However, it will be more targeted and narrowed than the president had previously vowed, but the plan is still under discussion. In other words, it's one of these things where he said something, he's trying to get the desired effect by announcing that there's a possibility of something happening. This is how you test the water, isn't it? We'll do this in a kind of in a PG-13 or a PG kind of way. I had a brother that used to do this on dating. He'd call it like 3, 2, 1. You'd want to take some bold steps forward, right? I think we should get married and have babies. That's the step forward with a female. And she would say, whoa, 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 that's a little bit too much. And he would say, oh, no, I'm just kidding. I mean, unless you want to do that, right? So he would step back a couple feet. He said, yeah, we won't do that. Oh, I'm just kidding. We'll just take you to dinner unless you wanted to get married and have babies. So you're kind of stepping forward and backward. You're playing this game. You're throwing out an idea. Oh, no, I didn't really mean all that. Here's all the really aggressive tariffs we might do. Oh, you want to soften your stance? Okay, great. Well, we could do something. We could find something in between there. And if you do this 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, you're still 2 steps ahead from where you started. So you've gotten ground. You've gotten it by introducing something aggressive. Then you have this softening. It looks like you're much more moderate, and you still end up gaining ground. And the thing that Donald Trump is trying to gain ground on with the tariff thing, which makes perfect sense to me, there will be austerity. There will be discomfort. We will see prices rise at home, of course. That's because we don't have a good supply chain that feeds all the stuff we want. But if you listen to the way he said it, he didn't say they're going to tariff things that are also made in America. It's to protect American industries. You don't tariff things that you don't make in your own country, which means there's a lot of things we cannot tariff. In any case, it's just, this is more indication. I think it's more evidence that you're looking at a very strategic rollout of a lot of different plans. So it would have to be a tremendous screw up, which is a real possibility. It would be a tremendous screw up if we saw somebody essentially leaking confidential and or let's call it secret adjacent type materials prior to a kinetic strike. Unless this stuff was already rolling and there was no chance that it was going to hurt anything. Unless that we only saw the story after the fact, which is also interesting. Because the person who got that information didn't actually report on it because they couldn't confirm it until the actual, you'd know that if you were a decent journalist. You can't go forward and say, well, I've got these confidential war plans. It's just as likely that somebody was screwing with you. And then after it already happens and the safety already goes out, maybe that's the calculated risk. This is the argument, by the way, folks. You make a calculated risk, then you get to have a journalist say a bunch of stuff about Europe and our allies and the way that we look at a problem and the way that the Trump administration is working in the background once it's been validated. There's a possibility that you use this as a tool for messaging and you send it off to the team that should be on by all accounts, sort of like your political rival or the people that don't like you. And that's an interesting way to get your messaging out. I'll give you a little bit of both of these things. It's a possibility. Before we do, one more thing I want to say, 23andMe, I've been vindicated on this. This is another thing that I didn't want to be right about, but I've always seen these things as a problem. The spit in a cup DNA test. This is a story that's coming from NBC. Just a general cautionary thing, because we like to look for scams. We like to look for emerging threats. We like to look for things where, unfortunately, like I said, I was correct all along about this, but I never wanted to be. I just didn't want to see people selling off people's DNA data. And yet, it was pretty obvious that was going on. 23andMe has a bankruptcy filing, and it sparks privacy fears because now their DNA database is up for sale and millions of people are in it. That's not a good scenario for most of you if you're thinking about it. Folks have absolutely no idea where their data is going to go. The other problem is a lot of this stuff was actually stored in Chinese servers. And if you know anything about Chinese cyber law, you know that the Chinese government requires every single company that does business on servers in China to give government access on the back end of it. They have to be able to see it. That's part of the cost of doing business in China. You basically have to compromise yourself to the Chinese Communist Party and to the Chinese government. So if you're cool with the PRC having access to your database of your DNA, it's too late for most of you. The Ancestry.com stuff, the 23andMe, anything that involved you spit in a cup, you do a swab, and you send it off to somebody. Now somebody's got your genetic profile. It could go as little as they can just identify you, and now there's a global database. That's kind of not a favorite thing. The worst version of it is like we're seeing in real time because of the JFK file releases and people who have been reporting on this for a little bit. I just watched an entire video on Mike Benz. You guys can find it on my X profile right now. Apparently, the Department of Defense has been doing bioengineering and warfare in a way that they could kind of covertly hide it for a long time, to include things like Lyme disease is most likely, tick-borne illnesses. The strategic value of that was that they were going to be able to make it into a pest that they could organically deliver. You could drop it from the air. You could, seed it in packages. And then you've got a bunch of these little tiny critters that are now going to disable your crop worker population through Lyme disease. And yet, it's everywhere in the United States. We have an entire season where we worry about that in the Northeast. And apparently this whole thing was developed in Montana at some sketchy laboratory with DARPA funding and DOD stuff. So once again, another example of there's unintended consequences down the line. Do you want our military doing targeted DNA-based viruses, which seems like a possibility that you could actually hone in on certain types of populations, whether they be because of certain traits, whether it be because of ethnic heritage and so on? You think that's outside of the realm for the Chinese to do? They seem to have created a virus that went after a lot of old people that were really sick. That seems super helpful if you have an aging population of people that are going to be a burden on your healthcare system. My concern, my biggest concern with COVID from the beginning, this is purely speculation, no evidence to back this up other than looking at the way that it works. China has a population bomb coming their way. They had the one-child policy for a very long time, which meant that the people were incentivized to have male children. And so now you have those men, and they're roughly in my age bracket. They're somewhere between like 30 and 50. And there are far too many of them. They don't have any women around. They didn't have families because there weren't enough women to create families that would go on and create that natural support system. So all of those people are going to end up on the rolls of public assistance in China. Millions and millions and millions of them. Wouldn't it be convenient if you had a virus that like very aggressively took out people over a certain age bracket, that there was a much higher morbidity rate over the 65 or 70 when those people stop being producers and they start becoming a complete drag on the Chinese economy? This was my concern. And the worst part of it is that there's a really decent possibility that our government was involved in it as well. Now, what their instinct or what they were trying to do with it, another animal. But this is kind of the ugly piece. So when you start looking at these bankruptcies and you start thinking, that's a lot of data, that's a lot of your personal information that is out there flying around in the world, you ought to be concerned about it. There's nothing American about you losing access to your genetic material. And all of you who did this stuff, by the way, you signed that all away. I have family members who did it as well. For what? For like the curiosity of like some mediocre panel test that told you that you were 23% Irish, which doesn't make any bit of sense at all because you can't specifically trace DNA to any particular place. This is all based on like kind of junky science to begin with. Anybody who's looked at that, but it does fill in that interest. We have such a soft and curious population that we can spend money on things that have zero benefit to you whatsoever. Now, if they were doing like real genetic profiles, you wouldn't have done it through 23andMe. You would have had genetic profiles done through like a physician or some sort of a medical research group. They're going to tell you that you have like a risk to this. Okay, fine. That's not what this stuff was. This was like curiosity. This was cheap. This was a cheap way to sell you a kind of interesting product for your own sort of bragging rights at a cocktail party. And at the same time, now you have millions of people's DNA up for sale. That's not my favorite thing in the world. So go out there and protect your own data, folks. There's only one way to do it. You're the only one responsible for you. And unfortunately, the one thing you can't do is you can't stop family members from doing this stuff, even when you tell them it's a bad idea. They may or may not still go into it. Let's do one more ad read, and then we're going to get nothing in but op and oops. Patriot Mobile is our mobile provider that we sit here, and we are going to be in favor of at the Kyle Seraphin Show simply because they care about the same things that we care about. They care about freedom. They care about the First Amendment. They care about first responders. They care about all of the sort of American values that you do as well. Just because the election is over doesn't mean that there's not a fight to restore the country, whether it be taking it back from judges, whether it be doing the right thing. You can also take a stand with your dollars that you spend. You can vote with the money in your wallet by choosing America's only Christian conservative wireless provider with Patriot Mobile. It's patriotmobile.com/KSS. They're the only one that has a slightly different promo code. KSS will get you 1 free month of service when you switch to them today. You're going to get outstanding nationwide coverage because they operate on all 3 of the major networks. You can keep your cell phone number if you want. You can get a new one. You can upgrade your phone. You can keep the same phone you have. The difference is every dollar you spend supports the first, the second, the sanctity of life, veterans, first responders, and so on. Switching is pretty easy. You guys, you can port that number over, and there's 100% US-based customer service. If you want to call them, you can do that too. It's 972-PATRIOT. Give them that promo code KSS to get a free month of service. And you can support and defend your values with every call and text that you make. Check them out. The link is also in the show notes. Very easy to do there as well. All right, should we get into this thing? This is what it looks like. The Houthi PC small group. This is supposedly what you're seeing on the screen right now. Picture of Pete Hegseth looking over his left corner. This is John Ratcliffe and Michael Waltz, and MAR is supposed to be Marco Rubio, SM supposedly Stephen Miller, JD Vance in there as well, and everybody congratulating themselves on a good start. Good job, Pete, and your team. The team in MAL, that's Mar-a-Lago, did a great job as well, says Mike Waltz. Great work, all. A powerful start. I've been listening to these guys talk at least for the last few months, and it seems unlikely. I don't know. I've been in a lot of chats with men, group chats, where we're talking about policy, where we're talking about actions. The Suspendables have them. I've been in them with journalists, where we were working on rolling out a story. I've worked in them with people who are trying to do lawsuits. Not once have I seen sort of a concerted, everybody jumps in and this looks very scripted from the outset. Okay? That's what it looks like to me. So Donald Trump was asked about this. Hey, sir, Mr. President, what's the story with the Atlantic thing? He demurs. I don't know anything about that. That could go either way, but I'm going to let you hear it in his own words. We're going to kind of figure out what we think he has to say about this and whether this is intentional. Then we're going to go to Pete Hegseth, whose name is in there, supposedly one of the people that was the leaker. The original leak supposedly was done by Mike Waltz, and apparently Waltz added this quote-unquote journalist from The Atlantic. Okay, but that to me, everybody responding, everybody only has one response, everybody weighs in like it's a conference call where somebody is calling on everybody. That seems scripted. And if you'll notice, there's like a certain amount of time in between each one of these. They're pretty closely laid out. I don't know. All right, so here's Donald Trump being asked about it.
Mr. President, your reaction to the story in The Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of the Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis?
Right.
Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time. Anybody else?
I sort of love it. He's just like, I don't really care what you have to say. I'm not going to address it. How about Pete Hegseth? And then we'll do Pete Buttigieg. We'll do two Petes. How about that? We'll do back-to-back Petes. One, obviously representing the Trump administration. This is the Secretary of Defense. And then the former Secretary of Transportation, who is going to lean on his very clean uniform time when he deployed for 5 seconds overseas and was a quote-unquote intelligence officer. So let's start with the first Pete. This is the one we like more. See what he thinks. This honestly could go either way, too. This actually doesn't look that great. He's trying to he basically does the Donald Trump pivot where he just goes into an attack mode. I don't hate it, but it doesn't mean that it's not an oops.
Can you share how your information about war plans against the Houthis in Yemen was shared with a journalist in The Atlantic? And were those details classified?
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. I would love to comment on the Houthi campaign because of the skill and courage of our troops. I've monitored it very closely from the beginning, and you see, we've been managing 4 years of deferred maintenance under the Trump administration. Our troops, our sailors were getting shot at as targets. Our ships couldn't sail through. And when they did shoot back, it was purely defensively or...
Okay, so that's interesting. What I honed in on was the question, leaked war plans. That phrase, war plans, seems to have originated over at the Atlantic, and then apparently it was marched out. Now, war plans sounds like a thing that would be classified. I'm pretty confident that if you actually had real war plans, those would in fact be straight up classified. And you would not be able to just discuss them. But then you look at the actual kind of context of what is going on there. They're not talking about troop movements. They're not talking about actual intelligence. They're talking about policy, which might be a little bit sensitive. I think that's possible. And we'd have to see a little bit more of it. Apparently, Jeffrey Goldberg didn't share all of this chat, or at least the stuff that I could find online didn't show it. But here's what his article is entitled. And the article was dropped yesterday. Again, about 24 hours, a little bit less than 24 hours before we're supposed to have a hearing on national intelligence. And it's 24 hours before we're supposed to be talking about China and Russia and Iran. Does the Trump administration want to talk about this instead? That's a real possibility. The Trump administration, he just lumps them all in, accidentally texted me its war plans. That's a really provocative title, most likely picked by an editor. Probably not by Goldberg, but possibly had some input on it. U.S. national security leaders included me in a group chat about upcoming strikes in Yemen. I didn't think it could be real, and then the bombs started falling. He actually lays it out right there in the beginning of it. You wouldn't think it would be real if someone added you this chat. Now, I have all kinds of interesting people that reach out to me. People reach out to me and they go, hey, I'm this attorney and I'm involved in this. And I'm like, how the hell did you get my number? That's always the first question. I'm always asking, how did you get my information? Because I want to validate, is it somebody that could have given it out? The story, which I read and I found it fascinating, he doesn't do that, apparently, at least not in his own telling of it. He says that he got a signal connection from someone who he believed could either be the real or a masquerading version of Michael Waltz. He got that on March 11th. That tells you that if this is an op, it was planned for quite a while. He received a signal connect from a user identified as Michael Waltz. It's he explains what Signal is. Most of you guys know it's an end-to-end encrypted app. It's something I use all the time. My buddies and I talk about it. If you talk to me, you'll end up on Signal. That's where we go. I like the idea that it deletes things. I like that there's end-to-end encryption so it can't be compromised in transit and so on. And a lot of people in Congress have been used this. This is the default method for people who kind of, it's open source and it doesn't have US-based servers. It doesn't live on a server. He said, I assumed that it was not the actual Michael Waltz. I had met him in the past. I didn't find it strange that he would reach out to me. It actually is pretty strange. The fact that he thinks it's not strange is interesting to me. And then he says 2 days later on Thursday, and this is going back almost 2 weeks now, at 4:28, I received a notice that I was included in a Signal chat group called Houthi PC, that's Papa Charlie, small group. And then the method or the group began with the following. By the way, he never confirmed who this person was. He never confirmed what was going on. He never asked, hey, did you want to connect with me? Which is a normal thing you would do when someone tries to connect with you. You just accepted it. And it says, team, we're establishing a principals group for coordination on the Houthis, particularly over the next 72 hours. My deputy, Alex Wong, is pulling together a Tiger team at deputies and agency chief of staff levels, following up from a meeting in the sit room this morning for actions, and we'll be sending that out later this evening. That looks to me like more information described. That is the kind of thing that you would put out in a memo, that you'd put out in an email to people that are not familiar with the situation. Why would you have to say my deputy, Alex Wong? Wouldn't you just say, hey, Alex is going to be doing this if everybody knows who his deputy is? Because they would. Because that seems pretty common. This all leads me down the line of op, and I'll show you a little bit more, and we'll see. The other possibility is that this was just a screw up by Waltz, and then he's been exposed as being someone who's in contact with Goldberg, which is a possibility as well. This all continues on in kind of this scripted way. So we'd have to believe that not only are they discussing this stuff on Signal, but they're also like total screw ups on it. They're also using very official photographs. When I deal with people who are in government, when I deal with people who have a high level of connectivity, either to a political, or they are members of like a pretty powerful group of things, or they're like a high level media person, almost always they don't actually include an official photograph. They don't. Reporters do. Decision makers do not, for whatever it's worth, on Signal. They'll have cloak and dagger icons, which is the default one. They'll have a picture of a dog. They'll have a picture of something that means something to them. They'll have a picture of a car. They oftentimes do not have their official portrait. And that's what we saw in some of the Signal group. So let me just show you. There's Pete Hegseth. That is a professional headshot for Pete Hegseth. And he's saying VP. So he's calling out JD Vance. The way that you tag somebody, by the way, is you hit @JD and it'll actually populate their name so you know who they're being tagged. But you write VP. I fully share your loathing of European freeloading, and it's pathetic. But Mike is correct. This is a lot of long form writing. This looks more scripted to me. I'm just weighing in, one guy listening to it. Let's get Pete Buttigieg's idea. He wanted you to know that classified systems and unclassified systems cannot mix, that there is no there's no unclassified material on classified systems. About to blow this out of the water in 2 seconds here. Any of you who've ever held a security clearance and ever worked on what's called Simpernet in the military, or you worked on BuNet, which is the bureau version of it, or any other version of what's called like the red side. The red side is a secret up to and including no secret information. Pete Buttigieg is out here trying to explain this to a CNN audience, assuming that nobody there has ever had a security clearance and no one has ever worked on this stuff. It makes me wonder how much he trafficked in it, because about 80% of what I used to get on the red side computers was unclassified. Here he is talking about something that's not true.
Experience, both in the cabinet and as an intelligence officer, you would have to go out of your way to take classified information and move it into an unclassified system. I don't know if a lot of folks understand how this works, but it's not like there's a computer where you might get an unclassified email and a classified email in the same inbox. They're not even the same computers. By design, it is very difficult for information to move from one system to the other unless somebody goes out of their way to do that. And, I don't want to speculate on how the FBI will respond to this or how Congress will respond to this, but I know that it was drilled into us back when I was an intelligence officer that if you ever took top secret information, moved it over to an unclassified system and disclosed it, that would be a crime. I mean, I can't tell you how much this was drilled into us when I was in the military. So much.
What about Hillary Clinton? I'm just curious. Are we setting up like a Hillary Clinton prosecution there? I don't actually get into the 4D chess game because I just don't think that's real. But that actually is really, really funny and interesting to me. That declination, maybe the statute is passed, but are we just going to go ahead and skewer that woman one more time with the fact that everything Pete Buttigieg just said could apply to 2015 and 2015 and 2016 Hillary Clinton, and the what difference does it make, and the any reasonable prosecutor nonsense from Jim Comey? Are we just hitting that home again? Because that's kind of fun to me when I think about it. He's wrong, by the way. It's actually not that hard to move classified stuff up or down if you want to. There's supposed to be a look for it, but moving stuff from the unclassified side into the classified terminals, the FBI had a system that was called, what was it called? Uplift? I think it was called Uplift. And then the other one was called Downdraft. There were two programs. You'd literally go to a website, you'd load whatever files you wanted to have onto the other classified enclave or the unclassified, and it would search it for portion marks and things that would obviously show that it was classified or not, and then it would move it. And if you did something really sketchy, then it would flag like a security officer to check it out. But this stuff happens all the time. You move it up and down. You know what the most easy way to move classified information to an unclassified place is? It's your brain. It's the same thing that Hillary Clinton was accused of doing, that she read emails on a classified enclave, secret, top secret, doesn't matter, then turned around and then used them in emails that were personal, like this. This is exactly a one-to-one look, and nobody ever paid for it at that point. The other thing is that the president actually has like the unilateral ability to declare that this is fine or not fine in advance. So I think that's kind of fun. We should ask a little bit more about who is this person. Let's do who is this guy, Jeffrey Goldberg? Because for context, he's not exactly an honest operator. And so it'd be interesting if they tried to set him up. And you could imagine that Trump probably has some maybe some vindictive feelings towards the guy based on the way that he operated. First clip you're going to be hearing, if you're just listening, is September of 2020. The second clip is coming from October of 2024. We'll play both of them back to back. This is him talking on CNN both times, getting his sort of take on the suckers and losers thing, which was sort of nonsensical, and just whether or not you guys think this guy is an honest operator or whether he was being set up. And like I said, he didn't go forward with it until after the attack. So it turns out there was actually no risk of him probably reporting on it. He's not that reckless. He did wait till it actually was substantiated. And at that point, that value was kind of not there anymore. It did represent a potential leak, or a spill. But the question, because spill and leak are different. This would be, I think I would call it a spill, which means that somebody accidentally moved classified information out there. It's not a leak. Leak is intentional. That being said, it also could be very easily the op part of it. And I think our chat has sort of landed on this. Listen to this guy. You tell me if they weren't setting him up.
At issue is a report by The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg based on accounts from anonymous sources. Goldberg writes of the morning Trump was scheduled to visit an American cemetery near Paris, where American Marines are buried. This is a piece of the article. In a conversation with senior staff members on the morning of the scheduled visit, Trump said, quote, "Why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers." In a separate conversation on the same trip, Trump referred to more than 1,800 Marines who lost their lives at Belleau Wood as, quote, suckers for getting killed. Earlier today, Goldberg responded to the pushback from the president and several of the president's aides.
I stand by my reporting. I have multiple sources telling me this is what happened.
Here's what Kelly told The Atlantic magazine about a White House conversation after Trump told Kelly he wished he'd be more like German generals. Kelly said, quote, "Do you mean the Kaiser's generals? Surely you can't mean Hitler's generals." And Trump said, yeah, Hitler's generals. What do you think that this is important for voters to know about? Is that one of the why did you do the story now? Is it you finally got the confirmation of these stories recently?
Yeah, I got confirmations and I got on the record interviews that I needed to make sure that the story was solid, including an interview with General Kelly.
So there you go. Okay, so he did the General Kelly. Donald Trump was a big fan of Adolf Hitler. So that was one of the stories he did. The suckers and losers. There's other stuff as well. He was a big proprietor of the Russia hoax. So that's a question. We have to put that out there. Here's the owner of The Atlantic talking about why she bought The Atlantic. She's sitting on a panel. You can't see it if you're just listening, but the person that is directly to her right is Kamala Harris. And this was done in the sort of the tail end of the campaign that we just finished up. So here she is talking about how they wanted to be able to influence narrative, that they wanted to be able to have their own words in it. Again, that idea that war plan is the question that is being posed to Donald Trump, being posed to Pete Hegseth and others. The word war plan coming directly out of their narrative, directly out of The Atlantic, tells me something as well.
It was pretty obvious to me that we could build, we build out in a very cross-disciplinary way our work in capital investing and policy and philanthropy, and we could do this work forever and ever, and we could have the narrative overtaken by someone who has a lot of power, who's completely contrary to us, and we could never get to the place where we think we're part of a more just and equal society. And so it was obvious that if we could be part of the creation of cultural narrative, that would that would enhance and amplify all the work that we're doing.
Which is Hillary Clinton talked about today, is telling the story, getting the content out there.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
telling the story, getting the content out there, being able to craft narrative because we need to be able to buy an outlet that we can push this forward. Jeff Bezos owns Washington Post. Now you've got this lady, I think her name is Laura Powell. Lauren Powell owns The Atlantic, and she wanted to do so specifically so she could influence narrative. That's what she says. Let's go to the other side of the coin here. Let's go to the accident side of the coin. Jesse Kelly had a take on this. I like Jesse Kelly. Also, seeing how people have reacted to this and who is defending and who is not kind of tells you a little bit about it. I found Jesse Kelly to be a pretty honest operator all the time. So let's imagine that this was in fact a mistake. If it is, again, we have to wait long enough to find out. If we see Michael Waltz removed from his position, you are going to know something very, very specific right away. Jesse Kelly saying, look, you can make mistakes. You just can't make a mistake at this level. If they don't remove him, it leads me more down the line of this was, in fact, an op.
Accidents are okay depending on the qualifications of the person who committed the accident and depending on, most importantly, the importance of the topic at hand. We are dealing with national security issues, military issues. The Trump administration has less than 4 years to purge the communist menace from inside the federal government, while at the same time juggling about 19,000 world affairs, international, domestic, and otherwise. And if there is one person, I don't care what his name is, in the Trump administration who was so thoughtless, careless, or stupid that he's going to include a dirty communist on an important group chat of national security matters, then that person can prepare his resume, pack up your stuff, and leave Washington, D.C. immediately. And it needs to be done publicly so everyone else in the administration understands you're not allowed to be a moron.
Very simple. Right? The argument is we watch and see what happens, which is always a great idea. If you see what happens, then you'll know a little bit more about how it's taken internally. If somebody is publicly fired and shamed and sent out, that says you can't be a moron. If somebody is protected and continues onward and this becomes a nothing and all we do is hear a little bit more in the hearings talking about some stuff, okay, that tells us a little bit as well. We have to have a little bit more evidence. We don't have it all right in front of us. That's pretty clear. We could ask Jasmine Crockett what to do. Jasmine Crockett just thinks that you need more black ladies, apparently. This is a decidedly racist take. I hope that we have more of this from the Democrat side. That's actually why they keep losing. Float this lady, please.
And then y'all want to come at us and act like people of color are the problem or that women are the problem? Like, baby, you probably need a good black woman in the room who can check you and tell you that, first of all, you shouldn't be doing this shit on Signal or anything else.
She's so classy. I just wish that she would just always talk. I'm so glad that Dallas decided to elect her and put her out there. And actually, I'm really excited that Democrats continue to post her because she thought that was a good idea to broadcast into the world as a sitting congresswoman. That tells you something. How about somebody with a little bit more class? How about Scott Jennings taking on this? I think this is interesting, whether it's damage control or whether or not there's something more at play. He's fairly well connected. People talk to him. And he's on CNN talking about this. He's been in some pretty high-level meetings, I have to imagine, at some point. He starts talking about how this was preloaded on, that this was actually a way that people were, discussing things. If you've ever accidentally added anybody to a group, I don't think that's ever happened. And the fact that nobody looked at it and went, how come this one person's just lurking and not talking? You can see that stuff on Signal, and you can easily remove them. So that leads me more towards the op piece of it. I'm just saying, we still need a little bit more evidence, but I keep leaning more and more towards it. And then I'm going to play you the ultimate argument, which I think Tim Pool lays out pretty well. Again, I wanted to kind of see who says what, whether I agree with them or not. Here's Scott Jennings.
All right. Moments ago, Caitlin Collins was reporting on her show, Scott, that there is shock inside the White House that this chat was texted to Jeffrey Goldberg. Are you shocked?
Well, sure. I mean, it's a shocking thing, and they've admitted that it was a mistake and admitted that it's authentic, so they're owning up to it. I think they're still, based on what I've heard tonight, trying to figure out how it happened. I'm not sure the National Security Advisor Walls even knows Goldberg. In fact, I don't believe he knows him and has never met him. I did learn a few things in some of my conversations, if you're interested. One is that the Signal program was preloaded on a number of devices and agency computers in this circuit when they got there. So in their view, it was already in use. Number two, in some of the messages, they talk about needing to go to the high side computers, which is the classified system. So they clearly were knowing there was a line on what you could discuss in a chat like this versus classified system. Number 3, there is a dispute over whether the term war plans is being exaggerated. And number 4, look, I love the policy. It's well executed. You've got a thoughtful policy discussion going on, and we did what the Biden administration would not do, stop these people from harassing our shipping lanes and our boats and our Navy. So good on the Trump administration for reversing a bad policy.
Okay, so he hones in on a couple things. Number one, they're using the word war plan. That is the leftist term that is coming from CNN, even has it on the Chiron. So you're getting that narrative march out. That's pretty interesting. We're going to do one last little thing about war plans. I'll play you some Cat Williams because I think it's very interesting. Verbiage is incredible. And it's very specific, and it means things, and it has emotional triggers. It either makes you think about something. Imagine war plans. Close your eyes right now and do that for me. Imagine war plans, whatever that means. Are you seeing a battle map and some sort of generals standing around and, some sort of national leader moving pieces around, Game of Thrones style? Or you're seeing it Axis and Allies style in World War II? They've got this big situation room and a big plan. Are you looking at it and seeing a darkened room with computer screens everywhere where you've got satellite intel? That's what war plans looks like to people in their heads. Or it could look like this. Hey, Pete Hegseth. See, by the way, the vice president knows how to do the highlighting thing. If you think, what does he say? He says, Pete Hegseth, if you think we should do it, let's go. I hate bailing Europe out again. Let's make sure our messaging is tight here. Interesting, talking about messaging. I don't get into this kind of stuff other than it looks fairly scripted. And if there are things we can do to up front to minimize risk to Saudi oil facilities, we should do that as well. Then you've got him talking about whether or not they should be bailing people out. This is Pete Hegseth talking about it, talking about shipping lanes. Mike's correct. This is not how people normally talk in a signal group. You just run back and forth. There should be some snarkiness. There should be some reality to this. This sounds like a scripted meeting where everybody feels like what they're going to do. There's no swear words. There's no funny emojis. There's no reactions to any of these things, by the way. Whenever somebody says something, the fastest way that you're going to agree with it is you give it a thumbs up, you give it a bullseye, right? You give it a 100. Signal is really easy. If you were to look at every single Signal chat I have with more than a few people, every single one of them would have some reactions. There's no reactions. That looks scripted to me. And so here's Tim Pool's take on it. You guys tell me what you think in the chat. We'll get to that. Again, this leans more like op to me, and I'm not one to give passes for stupidity.
They accidentally created a group chat to discuss bombing Yemen and included a liberal Russia journalist.
On accident.
Then there's the other story, and that's they intentionally created the group chat with a script that took 2 days to write, and they wanted him to espouse their narrative to the world. Look, I don't know exactly, but I think there's a strong possibility that these journalists are dumb as a box of rocks. And the Trump administration, should they have actually included him, did it intentionally so that he would report their words behind the scenes, which I got to be honest, makes him look kind of good. J.D. Vance saying, we can't bomb Yemen. This goes against Trump's message. And then Hegseth says, but we're the only ones in the world who can put a stop to this. And then there's J.D. Vance saying, I get it, you're right, but I really want to keep bailing out Europe. U.S. trade doesn't even go through here. It really sounds like a PR message distilled through a moron who thinks he got leaked information. So the American people think they're getting a genuine behind-the-scenes look at the difficult decision to bomb Yemen. Let's be real. When they decided to have a conversation about bombing Yemen, they didn't do it over Signal. They met at the Pentagon. They're all in D.C. as it is. What a ridiculous story. But maybe I'm crazy and everybody else is crazy.
I don't think so. I think it's pretty hard. Like I said, we'll have to see a little bit further what happens. This could have been smoking out somebody within the Trump administration who makes bad decisions. It could more likely have been, I think, scripted just because of just the way that chat looks. It doesn't look natural to me. And I'm in a lot of those with those types of people. Now, strangely enough, in my life, I hang out with people that are in the national security space that have a lot of instincts that know exactly what it looks like and what kind of compromises can be done. And you know that you're going to be targeted from nation state level actors and they can break through that. Listen, they're not going to break the encryption in Signal. They're going to break into your phone very specifically. You know who can do that? The Israelis. We know that. There's spyware technologies. I actually went on Dan Bongino's TV show back when he was still doing Fox and talked about this. They have the ability to break foreign phones and U.S. phones. Pegasus and Phantom are NSO spyware technologies that can do this kind of stuff. You don't need to grab the data in transit. You can literally just grab the phone and see everything on there, so you get on either end of the encrypted tunnel. That's how you actually compromise something like Signal. You tell me. You guys can go ahead and put it. I would love to see. Put it in the comments below. Make a comment over on Spotify. I want to know where you're weighing in on this because it's early. But let me give you two last little things. This is kind of a fun reaction. There's a guy named Eli Mistal. He looks kind of like Kenan Thompson, the guy from SNL. I actually thought this was an SNL skit. This is the stuff that Democrats are going to be talking about. They're going to be talking about whether or not there's a problem with leaking classified material on Signal. Meanwhile, they defended Hillary Clinton. And what difference does it make? And the email servers, and it shouldn't be about that. She lost, by the way. That was a losing battle. And then they want to run on, we should make 16-year-olds vote. So this is what they're talking about over on MSNBC. Just as a contrast. You tell me, op or oops?
Okay, so like what?
Well, we could eliminate all voter registration laws. See, when Democrats get in charge, we try to protect voting rights. We don't make voting easier. Now, I'm all for voter eligibility requirements. We might disagree about what those requirements should be, but, I'm going to say that, there should be an age limit to vote. I might say 16, you might say 18, but I'm not going to say 8, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to agree that there should be voter eligibility requirements. But once you're eligible, why do you have to pre-register? Why is that even a thing? It wasn't a thing in this country at the founding. We didn't have voter pre-registration in 1787. We didn't have voter pre-registration in 1821. We only started having voter registration, generally speaking, after the Civil War. Why do you think that is? It's because a bunch of freed African slaves were migrating up north, and all of a sudden New York was like, we need some registration up in here, right? A bunch of immigrants from Europe.
Oh, yeah, the rule was racism. The people that freed the slaves were so racist. That's what was going on. They didn't want all those racially mixed people coming in and voting. Apparently, they're just going to completely ignore the fact that the Democrat Party was the one that was stifling black votes. That's why they actually left in the first place. Anyway, but don't worry about history. Op or oops. That's the kind of conversation they want to have. I actually think this is a fairly telling piece here. This is a pretty good argument about why this doesn't work and why what they're doing is a failure and why you're going to have to. They're giving them something shiny to look at. As long as they're looking at signal chats, they're not paying attention to where the real battleground is, which is population voting with their feet. Here's Bill Maher honing in on the actual victory. And why I said, if we don't have two functional parties, one party is actually actively running themselves off the cliff as fast as they can. And they are actually losing where it matters in population density. And that means in representation. And it also means, and probably most importantly, it means in electoral college votes. Listen to this little kind of slay. You tell me if this doesn't kind of slight your thoughts about where they are not paying attention. This is Laser Pointer 101. Get people to follow the dot. Follow the signal chat for me.
California is projected to lose 3 seats, New York 2. Also going to lose a seat, Minnesota, Oregon, Rhode Island, Illinois, all blue states. Who's getting these? Texas, Florida, Idaho, and Utah. I mean, this looks like game over, and the reason why people are voting with their feet is a lot of what your book is about.
Yeah.
Taxes and regulation. I certainly have been screaming about it forever. I did 3 years with a sign here that said, how long is it going to take me to get my solar hooked up? 3 years. Talking about it on television. In this state, you couldn't do it. This state has almost 400,000 regulations. I just put in a new roof because the fire, I thought, let's get a roof that's not going to burn up. 2 inspections. Why are you inspecting my roof? It's my fucking roof. If it falls on me, that's my problem. And we're taxed more than any other state. People are leaving these kind of states for places where they're not, they feel the heavy breath of government on them.
Well, hallelujah. Yeah, people don't want heavy government because government sucks and they do a terrible job. As someone keeps quoting me over on social media now, and I appreciate that you do. Government is almost always the worst solution to any problem, even when it's the only solution. There may be some things that only government should do because we can't have certain things privatized. And yet, it's going to do a crap job of it because government doesn't care because it's using OPM, other people's money. It's a thing that you eventually run out of. It always is going to be a lesser solution than what you would do for yourself. You just can't do all the things for yourself all the time, and you have to outsource some of it to government. Things like, a judicial system, things like law enforcement, things like maintaining all the public roads. If it's going to get bigger than, let's say, your community. Fine. Okay, we get it. And yet, Bill Maher walking along and seeing this. I feel like this is a big distraction. I'm going to go leans up right now with the caveat that some personnel decisions could come out that would change my mind. So that's where I'm going to say it. I think it's important that it happened. because it tells us a little bit about how Donald Trump is operating and how the cabinet there is playing with things. And if they are, in fact, doing ops like this and entrapping the leftist media, that will be closer to the 4D chess that everybody has told me this guy has been doing. And it means that he's gotten some really smart people around him. That's what I'm going to say for today. I appreciate all of you guys joining us. You're seeing that our numbers are really depressed over on Rumble. I'm fairly confident it's because they boosted it and changed the algorithm to favor Rumble's favorite thing. Follow us in all the places you can. You can follow us at Kyle Seraphin. If you want to start watching over on YouTube, you certainly can do that live. We'll see the chat there as well. You can watch on Spotify after the fact, and I do appreciate you guys doing that. Give us a comment, boost it up. Make sure you're liking the video if you think the analysis is sound and interesting to you. If you like the clips that are getting polled, if you want to grab them. And by the way, I should put a caveat up front. You guys can cut any piece of the show and use it anywhere you like. I have no problem with anybody using it if it is interesting to you. I have seen some people doing that of late. It's kind of cool to see it, that it means something to you. So thanks for paying attention to the program. Very grateful for it. Like the video wherever you're at. We'll look forward to seeing you again. And if you guys want to stick around for more former FBI hot takes and people that are analyzing stuff that's going on in the world, my buddies, the American Radicals, that's Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend, are going to be live over on Rumble. I will feed you directly over there. If you're watching over on X or if you're watching on YouTube, check them out. It's at AmradPod. You can find them real easy. Have a great day, folks. We got a bunch of stuff coming up for tomorrow as well. So look forward to seeing you then. God bless you.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.